thank you all for joining us today. My name is Samantha and I'm the product marketer at HackerEarth. For all those who aren't familiar with HackerEarth, we help hiring managers and recruiters by providing them with technical assessments and remote interviewing solutions that help them reach the best technical talent in the least amount of time. We help assess, we help interview, we help upskill talent all under one roof so that your entire developer lifecycle from pre-hire to post-hire can be managed through HackerEarth. Just as you see on the slide, from hackathons and hiring solutions to help you attract and source candidates, technical assessment solutions for your screening process, an intelligent coding interview tool to upskilling and engaging your internal talent. You can do all this using HackerEarth, and that's how we help you make informed hiring decisions that are uber objective and biased. Now, speaking of being unbiased, today we're going to be talking about how you can build an effective recruiting strategy that is diverse and improve the ROI from those efforts. We all know that recruiting is the practice of attracting, of engaging, of interviewing, and hiring the right talent at the right time for the right job. Diversity recruiting involves the same, with one additional goal: giving all your candidates, without bias, an equal opportunity at every stage of the recruiting process. Today, we will be talking about how you can start pre-funnel to make your diversity hiring efforts actually count. So without further ado, I'd like to formally introduce you to our very, very special guest and subject matter expert, John from Recruiting Toolbox. Recruiting Toolbox is a consulting and training firm focused on helping companies improve who they hire and how they hire. Startups to big global brands, including Amazon, Google, Uber, and a lot more, hire his team of former recruiting leaders to build custom training for their recruiters and hiring managers and consult on talent strategies. John is a former recruiting director with Amazon and Expedia, an instructor for recruiting leadership labs, and a popular #1 rated speaker at major talent conferences like LinkedIn Talent Connect, SourceCon, and Breakfast UK. John loves tech recruiting. He also co-founded Talent 42, the US's National Tech Recruiting Conference in 2012. So John, welcome aboard. We are very, very, very excited to have you here today. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Samantha, very much. I'm excited to be here. I am going to share my screen and walk through some of the strategies that we can employ before sourcing. I think there is a tremendous amount of focus in the minds of many TA leaders, in the minds of many hiring managers. There's this big focus on sourcing, that diversity will be solved just by sourcing, 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 that our problem is really around attracting and sourcing. And there's no question in some markets it's challenging, but today I want to spend some time talking about things we can and should do pre-sourcing before candidates even enter the funnel. As Sam shared, we work with leading companies around the world. I've spent about half my career on the corporate side, leading technology recruiting at Amazon. I was there in the early days. I was there for 6 years, and I was the head of recruiting at Expedia. And now for 15 years, we've been working with all kinds of interesting companies in about 20 countries, doing a lot of work in the last few years that is really making sure that the kind of strategies that are in place to get great talent into the organization, that we're looking at it through a strong diversity lens. And I'm really quite hopeful about the world after I see a lot of the great work that's going on inside many companies. What I want to do today is to share with you 3 ideas. We're going to spend about 25 minutes. I'm going to kind of present some content to you that I hope is practical and actionable for you. And then we're going to spend about half our time doing Q&A. And Samantha has some questions prepared. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A box as well. And so the 3 things I want to talk about today, I want to talk a little bit about this concept of kind of widening the aperture, of really making sure that you are going after multiple success profiles and how to talk to our hiring managers about this. I want to talk about the missed opportunities that we have sometimes by trying to cram all of this strategy conversation with hiring managers into this very short meeting, into this small kind of kickoff meeting, or some of you call it an intake meeting. And then I want to talk a little bit around things we can do with our interviewers, and some specific practical things that we're seeing some of our clients leverage to make sure that we're making good, fair, quality hiring decisions. So with that, let's start with this first one. And one of the things I want to highlight is it's really powerful, of course, as a recruiting professional. When you are working with a hiring manager, one of the ways you demonstrate your subject matter expertise is to give them some insights into what the supply of talent looks like. So giving the hiring manager an idea of the availability of talent by location, by gender, by other factors that are used to kind of separate underrepresented groups into categories. And of course, there's tools like LinkedIn Talent Insights that are available. There's tools like Talent Neuron. There's sourcing tools like Seek Out. Many different tools exist out there that can help give you some insights. It's really, really important that hiring managers are aware, are educated on what's available in the market, because they often have some very unrealistic expectations, unfortunately. And many times the availability that they hear about, there's big concentrations of people from underrepresented groups sometimes in some geographies, but not others. And so sometimes by giving people an idea of where the talent is located geography-wise, where the talent is located, not just the kinds of companies, but the geography, really helps you build the case for maybe considering remote work, or justifying relocation spend, or even potentially setting up offices in locations that are kind of new for your organization. The second thing is, I think, to give hiring managers a more realistic sense of the progress that they can expect to make on their teams and in our companies. And so one of the things that I recommend you do is, take a look at some of the companies that your hiring managers want to get talent from. Many of them are probably going to be the big tech brands, the big tech companies. And most of those companies are sharing their stats, their progress on hiring more people, more women, more people from underrepresented groups in different job categories. And there's an example on here from one of the graph on the left shows, I know the font is tiny, but it shows, Adobe, Amazon, Apple, Cisco, Dell, Facebook. It shows a whole bunch of companies, and it shows the progress they're making, or their current kind of mix at many of the largest US tech companies based on ethnicity and gender. But you can also go and look at specific companies. They often publish their reports. And the reason you might want to do this is you might want to do a little expectation setting. So, if you have a team, a VP of engineering you're working with, or a CTO who says something like, I would really like in the United States for our team to have, 25% of our engineering leaders from, the African-American community and the Latinx community, being able to say, no company, including Google, which basically has unlimited resources to focus on diversity, is seeing those kinds of numbers. Let's talk more realistically around what we might be able to do. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm not saying, hey, this is too hard for us to do. I just want some reality going into the conversation. I want to get a realistic sense of the challenges of doing some of this, particularly if you're a bigger company. Doing this at scale is really hard. And you, maybe like me, have never worked at a company that has the resources of a Google, that doesn't have thousands of recruiters like Amazon, Google, Facebook, and others have. And so when you look at the progress they're making or not making in some of these areas, and compare it to the limited resources you have, I think, again, it's a good way to set expectations with your people leaders, and particularly your technology leaders. The other thing I want to highlight is not so much, hey, this is just a problem, there's supply side issues. There is, definitely some opportunities on the supply side, but a lot of our biggest problems in diversity recruitment, this is that pre-sourcing stuff. A lot of our biggest problems are us. We're in our own way. It's internal challenges that create a lot of the struggle. And one of the things I am really embarrassed to share is I spent most of my career as a corporate recruiter and corporate recruiting leader talking about this concept of an ideal target candidate profile. I would have this conversation with a hiring manager, and I would literally say things like, help me visualize this perfect candidate, the ideal candidate for this role. Tell me about their backgrounds. Tell me what schools they went to, what companies they came from. And I let the candidate right out of the gate, right in the beginning of this conversation, I let the hiring manager right at the beginning of this conversation define this very, very narrow kind of this idea that there's kind of one perfect candidate out there and there's one profile for this candidate. And this is a major problem. It is a major problem for several reasons, but especially when you look at it through the lens of diversity. What you've done is you've given your power over to a hiring manager who's describing the candidate and not describing the work, who's describing ideal, not describing the multiple success profiles that probably exist. In fact, in your own organization, you probably have lots of examples of candidates who have been successful in some of your technology roles that don't even have degrees from top schools, may not even have degrees at all. Our VP of engineering at Amazon had a biology degree. And I've worked with and hired many, many engineers and technology leaders in my career who don't have degrees. And so not only do they not have an elite school degree, but they don't even have a degree sometimes. And so there's a big shift going on in our profession that I'm very excited about, which is a move away from pedigree and kind of your past job titles and companies and schools. And moving more towards skill-based hiring, moving more towards, what can this person do? Not what do they have, but what can they actually do for us? So one of the things that I would love for you to think about when you're having your conversation with hiring managers around the kind of candidate that they're looking for, don't give all of your power away in that conversation. Don't start the conversation off by saying, hiring manager, tell me about your ideal candidate. And then you take a bunch of notes like an order taker. Don't do that. Don't do that. What I want you to do first, step one, is describe the work. Get the hiring manager to explain the work that the person needs to do. And talking about the work before you talk about the candidate, the ideal candidate, will really give you an opportunity now to kind of help widen the aperture, because as the hiring manager, she's describing the work this person's going to do. It'll help you think about maybe alternative skills, alternative industries. It'll help you think about maybe some companies that she's not thinking of that might have this kind of talent. And it'll focus more on the skills that the person needs to be successful, not just on their background, not just on keywords that you're going to enter into your Boolean search string. It'll really focus more on what the person needs to be capable of doing. And then what I want you to do is I want you to move to multiple success profiles as your language. Don't talk about one success profile, talk about multiple success profiles. You are widening the aperture. You're not lowering the bar, raising the bar. You are looking to the left and to the right of this former ideal target candidate profile. And the ones to the left and right, hopefully, represent candidates that are coming out of communities or schools or companies that may not have been on the hiring manager's radar as their ideal candidate profile, but are actually really capable people. So the shift away from this ideal candidate profile, this is fundamental. I would argue that, all of the effort that's put into sourcing, all of the effort that's put into building these elaborate Boolean search strings, improving our job descriptions, all of that stuff, it's great, but it's not enough if you don't get this right. This is absolutely foundational to doing a great job. Now, a lot of managers love to write job descriptions that are filled with, 100 requirements. And one of the things that I'm sure if you're like me, you found is, really, do you really need all 20 of those things to be successful? Are these really all must-haves? And the reality, of course, is that, you typically don't need all of these things. And even the things that they often say are really required are quite trainable. They're quite easy to pick up. So, you may have a situation where you need someone that has 10 out of 10, and they need to be an expert at all of these things because they're going to be the leader in the space at your company. They will be the mentor that other engineers will go to learn how to do X. So they have to have that expertise. And there's obviously specialized talent where you need someone that is a mobile developer, for example, and to bring that expertise because you're growing that team and you want that on the team. But there's a lot of our jobs where I think we let the hiring manager make way too many things kind of must-haves. And one of the things that I've learned in my career, working with thousands and thousands of hiring managers, we've trained over 10,000 hiring managers around the world. And one of the things that I hear from the savvy hiring managers, the managers who are particularly good at hiring great talent, is they're very, very aligned with their teams on what's trainable and what's not. So very early in the process, before the candidates start coming in for interviews, these hiring managers and recruiters are getting the interviewing team together and they're having an explicit conversation. What's trainable, what's not trainable. Now, I would argue that things like being adaptable, being curious, having strong empathy, these are things that are probably not as trainable. These are things that might even be deal breakers. And a lot of these things don't show up on job descriptions, but they are the things that predict success in many companies. And I found over the last 15, 20 years, many hiring managers in technology roles are now acknowledging that it is probably things like adaptability and curiosity and being able to learn and empathize with the user. These are things not very trainable, but these are the things that probably predict success as much as someone's depth of expertise in a particular technology. Why? Because the technologies are changing. You come in as an expert in technology X, and 2-3 years later, maybe we're moving away from X. And the fact that we hired you because you're an expert in X means you're going to be that hammer looking for a nail. You're going to try and solve everything with X because that's how you identify. That is as a developer, as a software engineer, you're a Java developer, so everything should be Java. Many savvy hiring leaders are saying, John, I want generalists. I want engineers that can pick up new technologies, pick up new skills. So we have to be really, really good at evaluating in our interview process. Can they learn quickly? Are they curious? Are they adaptable? Can they pivot? Or are they kind of religious about using a particular technology? Are they really kind of tied to one way of thinking? And are they willing to be a little more open around this? Now, industries, particular tools, process, there's a lot of things you can teach people on the job. And I would argue that many hiring managers have realized, if someone doesn't have 10 years of experience, if someone hasn't worked at our scale, if someone hasn't worked in our industry, those are much more likely, much easier to be kind of trained on. So there's this concept, you've probably heard of this concept of transferable skills. You learn skills in this area and it's easy to apply it to other jobs, other kind of work needs. There's a similar concept called adjacent skills, and adjacent skills are in a technology, context would be, maybe similar programming languages are kind of adjacent to each other. And so one of the things that I would love for you to introduce into your language, your conversations with hiring managers is this idea of adjacent skills. What are the skills that are close to, but not exactly the same as these must-have skills that you say you need? Can we find people who have some of these similar skills? And Stack Overflow has actually done some work to organize some of these. And this text is way too tiny. I'm just kind of showing you more of the graphic representation. But if you look at their insight survey from 2020, they talked to 65,000 developers and they looked at what tools they were using and they kind of organized them for you. So you can kind of get an idea of which tools are kind of similar to others so that you can maybe make some suggestions or ask some questions in that strategy meeting with the hiring manager. Hey, I know you say you want someone that has, must have, JavaScript, but there's also, strong HTML, CSS background, PHP background. Would you be open to considering someone? Could they easily learn that? Is this the kind of role we can afford to kind of, place a bet that they could pick this up? These are the kind of questions that I think can help you be more of a talent advisor in those conversations and help keep the aperture wide. 75% of respondents said that they had to learn at least one new technology every few months or once a year. That is pretty incredible. It gives you an idea of how often the technologies are changing. So this notion of hiring someone who is just kind of defined by the technology they use, I think is extremely limiting, not just for diversity, but I think it's extremely limiting for the CTO or VP engineering to be thinking that way. You want to hire people that are flexible, that can pick up new skills, learn new technologies. That's really what a lot of technology leaders are looking for. So I put some action items here. All of these slides are available for you to download. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I wanted to highlight for you, there are some action items after each one of these slides, things that I would encourage you to think about doing. I want to talk about the second thing, which is this kickoff meeting. And I want to share with you a little conversation that I had. I was talking to a hiring manager. We do focus groups. So a lot of our consulting and training work will spend time getting to know the hiring managers and engineering leaders and HR, D&I, everyone from across the organization. And we'll have these conversations with a sample of people. And I had a conversation with a hiring manager, And it was just so fantastic. It just made me smile because he was 100% right. And this is what he said. He basically said, listen, John, if a recruiter comes to me and we don't know each other, we've not worked together before, and you're coming at me as a recruiter with all of these strategy and all this new, hey, you need to widen your aperture, you need to change your interview process, you need to prioritize diversity, you need to be engaging your network, you need to be doing all these things, and you're coming at me in this 30-minute meeting, what do you think's going to happen? Do you think we're going to have time to go deep into all that? Do you think you're going to convince me to change everything I've been doing? I probably think I'm pretty successful at hiring. I probably don't think I have a problem. I probably, support diversity, but I may not be a champion. I may not be willing to kind of push that to the front in terms of priorities. So if you're coming to me when I've got a rec open, I want you to remember that it took me weeks to get that rec approved. It took me weeks to get that job approved. I may have had the need 6 weeks ago when so-and-so said they were resigning, or when my VP said that I could get that additional headcount. And now you're coming at me, and in 30 minutes, you think we're gonna cover all of this stuff? It is urgent, John. You have missed your window. You come at me now. We should have had this conversation weeks or months ago. Why are we talking about diversity for the first time when we have 5 minutes to talk about it? And I remember hearing this conversation, and I remember, just like I said, just smiling. Like, he was so right. He was so right on. When we talk about strategy in our profession, we talk about it like we're going to cram all of it into this 30-minute meeting, or 45, even 60-minute meeting. And I really appreciate the kind of mindset he had going into this, which is, hey, I support this, but seriously, dude, seriously, you need to back up. We need to be talking about this as a team. This isn't just for me to solve for. And so I really encourage you, as you think about your role as a recruiter, particularly if you're trying to elevate your role and be more strategic, is how do I get in front, not just of this individual hiring manager, but how do I get in front of hiring managers, plural, once a quarter, and talk about diversity, talk about our expectations around the way that they're going to engage our networks, or leverage our employee resource groups, or how we're going to change up our interview process, or how to get them into interview training so that they're not leveraging kind of biases and these pedigree orientation kind of hiring decisions. How do we get them engaged in that so that by the time they have a rec open, I have this foundation to build on. I'm not starting from scratch. This isn't the first time they're hearing about diversity and our expectations for them as a hiring manager. So I really like that. There's a lot of conversation around, sourcing, as I said. This is kind of the content I'm sharing with you today is really more the kind of pre-sourcing conversations we should be having, as opposed to just diving into sourcing. But I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of work that we need to do. And if I were having these kind of quarterly update meetings with a bunch of my hiring managers, I would want to acknowledge, sure, if we want to improve diversity, we need to source. Like, we have to have hunting and farming strategies. And by farming, I mean, we really need to be kind of building relationships, investing in the communities, not just extracting from the historically Black universities, not just extracting from, organizations that have, organized people around ethnicity or gender. We need to be investing in these communities. And that's some of the farming work we need to do. That's going to pay dividends over time. It's not a short-term go on and, a job board, or go on LinkedIn and find me a bunch of talent. It's farming work. And we need to emphasize that's what companies that are getting their unfair share of diverse talent, that's what they're doing. And we need to do that. The second thing, of course, is we need to look at how we're interviewing and make sure that our candidate experience is inclusive, particularly in a remote world. There's a lot of problems. We spend, my team and I, there's just 10 of us. We're not a big company, but we're a small but mighty team. And we work with world-class companies to help them kind of, define who they hire, and then build better interviewing strategies, training process, all of that. And a lot of our work, we realize with remote being true, gosh, I mean, some of the biases are more of a problem than they've ever been. And the more you can see kind of my background, you're looking at my Zoom background, this is my office, and you're seeing pictures, and you're picking up things about me based on how I dress, or things on the wall, or maybe I have a child come in, or maybe there's something in my background that gives you some indication. Like, there's a lot of bias that's of course used in decision making, all decision making. And so we need to make sure that we have a very inclusive interviewing process. We also need to make sure that we are training our hiring teams, that we are setting expectations around how they're going to engage their networks, and play more than just a passive role around diversity. Shift the conversation to more of a culture add, and explain why we're moving to that. And where possible, put some metrics, at a minimum, put some insights back out to the management community at your company, so they're aware of the progress we're making and where we have opportunities. And then this last one is really powerful, which is, how are we talking to the organization about speed? I presented at a conference a couple years ago, and I said, speed is the love language of hiring managers. Speed is the love language of hiring managers. When you are talking about going faster, you are speaking my language. My grandmother, who's from Croatia, her love language was food. That's how she showed me love. That's how she received love, feeding her grandson these ginormous meals. That was her love language. That made her happy. For hiring managers, it's speed. How can we go faster? And there's often a lot of tension in our culture between kind of this speed. What do you think the number one reported metric in talent acquisition is? The number one reported metric: time to fill. Our ATSs are built to report on these. It's what we talk about most. Speed, speed, speed. That's what gets the headlines. That's what catches people attention. Now, if you're going to focus on diversity, you might need to build some new muscles. This might be new for you. You might not have sourcing capabilities. You might not have great interviewing process. Your candidate experience might not be great for people that don't fit a certain profile. You might need to sacrifice a little speed in the short term as a way to get some of the diversity. So these are some conversation topics I would love for you to have with your leadership teams. And here's some action items. Again, I'm not going to read through all these, but these are in the deck if you want to grab some of these. The third and last thing I want to talk about builds on this idea of training your interviewers. And I wrote an article that was about license to hire. Is it time for us to require a license to hire, a license to interview, for our hiring managers? And I think the answer is yes, particularly if you're focused on diversity. I think there's a lot of bad practices going on. And there's a lot of people that are just not self-aware. They just don't know that they're bad practices. They're not evil. They're not anti-diversity. They don't realize that some of the techniques they're using are very much a screen out, not a screen in. They're tied to this culture fit, not culture add. They're doing things inadvertently that are discriminating against people. A lot of focus right now is on unconscious bias, but there's a lot of very conscious biases. And so there's a lot of conscious biases. We're very pro people from certain, age groups. We're very pro people from certain kinds of companies and schools. And there may have been systemic, race issues, systemic issues that prevent people from underrepresented groups getting into those companies, getting into those schools, having the same opportunities. And so having conversations, not just around the why for diversity, but really getting in there to help our interviewers succeed, give them alternatives to some of the techniques they're using is really powerful. And so, we do a lot of work in this space. I want to share with you some of the things that we tend to do. We want to make sure that we are replacing language like culture fit with culture add and explaining what that means. It's not enough just to say culture add. You have to talk about what behaviors are we looking for. I'll give you a quick example. I was working with a hiring manager, and he was saying, I'm pro-diversity, John. I want to do this culture add thing. And they talked about, the kinds of profiles. We did the work to kind of widen the aperture. It did all the right things. But when we got into the interview debrief and we're talking about a candidate, it was really interesting. Because even despite saying all these things, we got into the debrief meeting, and his comments were things like, I'm not sure they would be happy here. Their communication style was really different. The way she approached this problem was different than how we do it. And in fact, several times in the interview, she was really challenging me on some of my assumptions as the interviewer. And I just got the sense that, she wouldn't be happy in our culture. And basically what he was saying is, I don't want to hire someone different than the rest of us. I don't want to hire someone that's going to bring a different perspective. I don't want to hire someone that is going to kind of complement and bring different communication, problem solving styles. I don't want to hire someone that's going to challenge me. I want the status quo. Now, despite the fact that earlier he said he wanted diversity, he wanted the culture ad, I don't think he really understood what that looks like in an interviewing context. And some people will misinterpret this culture ad stuff. They'll say they want it, but when they get into the interview and a candidate is approaching something differently, has a very different lived experience, very different work experience that they're bringing into the conversation, a lot of people don't know what to do with that. A lot of interviewers, that's a no hire. You know, this person challenged me in the interview. I mean, that means they're not collaborative, John. And yet at the same time, they're saying we want innovators, we want out of the box thinkers. Then I would expect someone who is an out of the box thinker, who has a challenger mindset, to push on me a little bit in the interview. That's something I want, right? Right? A lot of interviewers are going to say no. And that's probably a false negative. That's probably a missing out on a good hire. Of course, if you want to make a more inclusive company, you need to make sure that when you're hiring for manager level roles in particular, you're evaluating them on whether or not they're inclusive. You know, shame on us if we're hiring people managers who are not inclusive, who are not championing some of the very things we're trying to build in our culture. So, you know, a lot of us have competency models, you know, we have behaviors tied to our values, and we assign those as focus areas during interviews. Awesome, do that. But here's what I would ask you. Is something around being inclusive part of that? Are you actually assigning that as a focus area? Because if not, missed opportunity. Of course, biases, you know, we've probably seen 100 webinars and articles on biases. I'm not going to go into that too much, other than saying confirmation bias, where you're seeking out information to confirm what you already think about a person and you're only focusing on that. That's a major problem in interviewing. And an even bigger problem, I think, is just this likability, affinity, similarity bias. This notion that, you know, I want to hire people that I like, that are like me, where I feel like I build a connection. And a lot of interviewers think they're creating this great candidate experience by spending the first few minutes in an interview trying to find something we have in common, A problem with this, of course, is that by focusing in on something we have in common, you're triggering that likability or affinity bias. And so you run a risk now of, what if I can't find something in common with this person who doesn't look like me, who comes from a different geography, a different economic class, who, you know, a different gender, different, you know, background. They don't come out of the tech companies. They don't come out of big consulting. They didn't go to university. I can't find something in common. That affinity bias might kick in and might cause you to say no to someone who actually would have been qualified. And then talking about what we take bets on, you know, this is something that's, I think, really clear. We do a lot of work helping companies build out what we call hiring principles. And the hiring principles are, you know, kind of our stated philosophy around hiring, kind of who we hire, how we interview, how we decide. And in these hiring principles, we talk a lot about what bets do we take, what bets do we not take? Like what kind of risks are good risks, what kind of risks are bad risks, and why? And there's a lot of conversation that's happening, you know, particularly around inclusion. Is it okay to hire a brilliant ass? And you should have an answer to this, not just you, the recruiter, not just you and your boss, not just you and the CHRO. The company should have a point of view on this. Is it ever okay to hire a brilliant ass, a jerk? And I would argue you need to be really prescriptive about your answer. And hopefully the answer is it's never okay, right? But I've worked at a company where it was okay. Someone who was a bit of an ass in the interview process, you know, talking to my coordinators, scheduling. We've hired people and they're brilliant technically, but oh my gosh, asses just repel top talent. Asses do not create the kind of environment we want if we're trying to kind of build, you know, inclusion first, then diversity, inclusion first, and then bring in more diversity. We really need to make sure that we're being smart around what we're taking chances on. And then the last thing comes from, you know, airport security a little bit. See something, say something. Are you giving your interviewers, not just the recruiter, not just your, you know, diversity rep or HR rep, but are you giving every interviewer not just the opportunity, but setting an expectation that if they see bias, if they see that pedigree bias, if they see a culture fit orientation, if they see language that is discriminatory popping up in hiring decision conversations, do they feel empowered? Do they feel an obligation even to say something? And, you know, there's a tremendous amount of work, as I said at the start, that's put into sourcing. And I'm seeing us kind of as an industry move through the funnel. You know, it's all diversity is all about sourcing. Now it's like, okay, no, it's all about interviewing. How do we get interviewing great? That's all wonderful. But when are we going to talk about the conversations that are happening to make the hiring decisions? That conversation is where, you know, the hire, no hire decision is a place where we absolutely have to have some way to inspect what's going on in there. We take for granted that people are going to use all of this great stuff they learned in our interview training, that they're going to avoid bias. They're not going to say culture fit. But are we as recruiters in the room? Are we in the virtual room? Are we part of the Zoom where people are talking about pros and cons of candidates? Does someone in that room feel empowered to say something if they see something discriminatory going on? And I would argue for a lot of companies, recruiters are focused on sourcing and closing. We're not very involved in the middle of the funnel. We should be, but we're not involved there. And we don't really have mechanisms to inspect to make sure that the right kind of things are happening, that the right kind of decisions are being made. And my team and I, you know, we do work to help companies figure out mechanisms to put into that decision-making process so that you do have a fair and equitable outcome. So you're making a good quality hiring decision there. I would ask you to think about what are the mechanisms I have, and do we have a see something, say something kind of culture? Do people feel safe about that? Not just people from underrepresented groups. I don't just want the one female engineer to feel an expectation that she has to say something in this 7-person interviewing team. I want everybody. I want the men and the women. I want people from all races, genders. I want everyone to feel comfortable saying something and not feel like they're under this pressure or they're going to get in trouble for saying it. The last thing I want to mention that is related to kind of interviewing is we need to make sure that learning and curiosity are big focus areas. So I mentioned inclusion should be a big focus area for us for manager level roles in particular. We also want to make sure that when we're in those kind of decision-making meetings, that someone has evaluated the candidate on their ability to learn, their ability to pick up new skills, their past examples of learning new tech, learning new, cultural norms, learning new, industry realities, all those kinds of things. Why? Because someone is going to say, we interviewed Shilpa and, she didn't have X, she didn't have Y, and I think she's a no hire. The reality is that X and Y may be a very trainable skill, and I need someone on your interview team to have evaluated Shilpa's ability to learn new tech, either to demonstrate that she could pick up something quickly and or get examples from her past where she was learning something quickly, and then to bring that into the conversation to say, wait, before we say no hire, question one, hiring manager, how trainable are those skills? And question two, did anyone get evidence that she has a track record of picking up new skills quickly? Did anyone get evidence that she would lean in and be curious and, and self-learn this new technology or self-learn something so she can close this skill gap? Because if we did, I'm not sure that's a reason to say no hire. I'm not sure that's a reason. I want us to kind of push on that. So here's some action items from that section. The deal is this with diversity. I think that there is no question that talent is equally distributed, but there's been a lot of historical access issues. There is not typically equal opportunity at most companies. There's very much a, hire the people that look like us, hire the people our age, hire people out of only these companies, these schools, these geographies. I think there's real limits on opportunity for a lot of folks. And I really think that you as a recruiter can be the difference maker. I think your ability to influence your hiring managers, influence your business, to be a champion for this, not just kind of a, I'm going to try and source better, but really thinking about the role you have before we even start sourcing to kind of set the stage, set the table so that we have success, so that we have higher ROI once we start going through the kind of, sourcing, interviewing, and closing stage. I really think that you are the difference maker here. A lot of opportunity exists, not just at the rec level. We really need to look at our whole system in our company. Every time we work with a new hiring manager, every time we lead a strategy meeting, every time we're sourcing, interviewing, assigning focus areas, leading a debrief conversation, these are teachable moments. These are teachable moments. These are opportunities for you to show up and not just kind of, be an expert who's quietly, taking notes or listening in, but being an expert who's helping to facilitate, who is interrupting some of these missed opportunities, who is championing candidates who maybe don't look like all the other candidates and speaking up, not just kind of giving the hiring manager what they want or doing it the way we've always done it, but to really push a little more. If we want balanced teams, what got us here won't get us there. We need to change something up. And I think there's big opportunities for us. And I'm actually very excited about the future of talent acquisition. I have had such an incredible year learning so much this past year and doing so much more work with companies. There's so much more pull, so much more demand for diversity coming from the business. It's really moving away from just an HR initiative, which makes me very excited. And so I have so much more clarity on where some of the root issues are. I hope you got some value from this. Hope you got something that's practical. I tried to give you examples of conversations you could have, things you can do, give you specific examples you can take back and put into practice. If you would like to get a PDF of these slides, you can download them off of our website, recruitingtoolbox.com/hacker. If you like this kind of content in general, talentadvisor.com has a lot of videos and guides and free best practices stuff for you. And with that, I want to say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share. I'm excited about the Q&A. I think we have about 20 minutes for Q&A, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, Samantha.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation, and you've shared some really great actionable insights to take away. A quick reminder for all those who have questions for John, please drop them into the question box that you see on your Zoom control panel. We'll be opening live for Q&A in a few minutes. Right. So now coming back to your presentation, John, from all the things we spoke about today, I do agree that it is very important for interviewers and recruiters to be very aware of the talent market today. And it is also important to give hiring managers, a realistic sense of the progress on hiring more people from underrepresented groups. Come to think of it, diversity efforts have been a part of the landscape for a long time now. And employers fall on a very large spectrum in terms of strategies, actions, and progress that they make to actually make those hiring efforts count. So before we talk a little bit more about that in detail, I'd like to run a quick poll for the audience to understand where they currently stand in their diversity hiring journey today. Okay, so I think the majority on the group right now from these results don't have a diversity strategy in place, but they're working on building a D&I program for recruiting, and about 34% of them have a recruitment strategy in place. So I think the question is, John, what is your biggest piece of advice to the majority of the listeners on this webinar who are yet to weave in a D&I strategy into the recruitment process? What is your biggest piece of advice for getting started with a diversity and inclusion strategy right from the pre-funnel stage?
Yeah, a great question. And I will say something that is maybe not what you're used to hearing, but I think there is too much focus in our profession right now of pushing solutions, of launching programs. D&I has become an initiative, a program. We hire a diversity leader, they have a team, they start running around, pushing out training and unconscious bias training. And, we start going to all these conferences, and all that stuff is good. All that stuff is good. But I would like us to back up a little bit. Before we launch into pushing stuff out, I would really like us to get the leadership team more engaged. And, when you're trying to influence, because a lot of diversity strategy requires really strong influencing skills. Influence lives in the why, not the what and the how of your programs and training and process changes and new sourcing strategies. It lives in the why. And so we really have to create pull with the why. Why are we focused on diversity? And one of the things that I find that's very, very helpful, particularly with senior leaders, of course, is to bring some data, is to help them understand the problems, the opportunities that we have. And so showing, the number of, I saw a funnel, a recruiting funnel at a company, and I can't share it with you, but it was very sad and probably not unlike a lot of funnels. There was about a 50-50 mix of men and women coming into the top of the funnel. Coming out the bottom of the funnel, it was about 80% men, 20% women. And they had done some similar analysis with people from underrepresented groups. And the question is, why? Why is this happening? And how do we get the leadership team more curious about this? Similarly with promotions, I've seen lots of examples where, men, women, or, data that is segmented by race or ethnicity, and look at promotion paths. And it's really interesting to see this kind of different kind of promotion funnel, who actually gets promoted. And it's really incredible how the majority tends to be overrepresented at the top, and the people in the minority are underrepresented. I think getting that kind of data combined with a little bit of market insights, showing what the competitors are doing, I think this is where we need to kind of start bringing more of the problem. What I want, my fantasy is that the executive team falls in love with this problem, falls in love with this opportunity, that they see this data and they react, that they go, this is unacceptable. This doesn't even make sense. What in the hell is going on in the middle of our funnel that we'd have 50-50 at the top and not 50-50 at the bottom? I mean, and I want them to have that energy and engagement. That, to me, there's an order of operations. You have to get them engaged in the why before you're going to go launch a bunch of programs and practices and training and all this other stuff. And I think that is missed sometimes. So that's where I would start.
Right, and absolutely, that makes complete sense. So I think the key, like you rightly mentioned, is to get the leadership right in from the start, right? Like get their buy-in from the start. Would you say that that is the most difficult part of implementing, a D&I program within the recruitment process?
I think so. I mean, it's too many programs historically have been HR programs, HR initiatives. And one of the things that I really appreciate is organizations that seem to be making real progress. They've embedded in the culture. They are actually holding hiring leaders, executives accountable for making progress. There's, if you go look at, for example, Uber is a client of ours. If you go look on Uber's website, you can actually see that executive compensation, when they report the results to the board, their executives are compensated on the progress they're making. And this is true at Microsoft and many companies. And so I think that this is probably one of the biggest opportunity areas, is to get those leaders engaged. But there's also issues of resourcing. There's also issues of culture. I talked about the speed and diversity challenges. Cultures are so focused on speed. Everything is about speed in startups. Everything is about speed in big companies. Every company we work with is becoming a tech company. Every retailer, every bank, every company we work with is thinking they're a tech company, and they all want talent out of these few companies, these handful of companies. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of kind of pre-funnel strategy work that has to happen. And there's no question you're never going to get the resources, you're never going to get the budget, the headcount you need if the executive team doesn't see this as a big opportunity area, if they don't personally feel accountable for focusing on this.
Right, and that's always the case, right? For any company initiative to actually get off the ground, much less succeed, senior leadership buy-in is absolutely essential, right? And like you rightly pointed out in your presentation as well, I think it is imperative to bring your interviewers aligned to your diversity goals, help them focus on soft skills, look at learning agility, and so on. So I think
exactly.
So I think it's fair to say that, you have several other stakeholders, primarily the leadership team, tied into the process when it comes to building a diversity recruitment program. With that said, there could be challenges along the way to ensure that every stakeholder of every concerned department aligns with that goal, right? So that could be the most, or one of the most difficult part around implementing a D&I program. So on that note, I'd like to run another poll for the audience to understand what their current challenges are. Are your diversity recruitment strategies working? What's standing in the way of progress? All right. So it looks like we have a mixed response from the audience. We have about 18% who say that, leadership support is something that is lacking in building a recruitment process, or, recruiters don't have time and resources. So I think, John, the golden question of the hour, and I'll keep this short and I'll keep this as my last question because I know we're on top of the hour, but the golden question is, what can we do to sort of drive leadership buy-in around our whole diversity hire strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I addressed some of this earlier. I think there's accountability opportunities. I think there's focusing on the why. I think there's not talking about it like it's an initiative or it's a one-time event. 2 years ago, I would say, Samantha, when we were talking to our client companies about their diversity work, it basically sounded like unconscious bias training, plus let's go to some conferences, and maybe have a few recruiters that were dedicated to sourcing from underrepresented groups, if you were lucky. And there might have been some kind of, training initiatives going on, or guest speaker series, something like that. But there wasn't a lot of embedded cultural shift going on. So I think I addressed a lot of that already, but I would say, this notion of, trickle down diversity, like you need to have engagement at the middle manager level too. Like you can't just have senior leaders nod their heads and have goals and then not have that, impact everyone in the organization down to individual interviewers. And I think the emphasis sometimes is placed on just the senior people and not enough on middle managers. I was talking to the CEO coach who works with a lot of really interesting technology companies, and he was saying, John, one of the biggest opportunity areas around diversity is we got to get middle managers on board. They are the secret to making this happen. The problem is middle managers are risk averse. Middle managers are overloaded with work. They want to go with the safe bet. They want to go with the predictability of choosing this profile or focusing their energy here, widening the aperture, trying new things, new strategies, new interviewing techniques, being open to different profiles. These are not things that most middle managers are rewarded for doing. They're rewarded for kind of following the lead of the rest of the company. So we need really strong role modeling, and we need people to have permission to do the right thing, and we need to hold them accountable for doing the right thing. And the right thing might be different. We might need to be much more prescriptive at that middle manager level. So I would say those are some things that wrap up what I was talking about earlier. What kind of questions are we getting off of out of the Q&A, Samantha?
So we have a few that have come in. There's one by Neha, who asked that when a hiring manager is not satisfied with the adjacent skills and wants the 100% perfect candidate, how should a recruiter then convince that hiring manager to look at some niche skills or look beyond those adjacent skills?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to say something again that might not be common. If there's no pain, there's often no pull. You have to make sure that the hiring manager sees this as an opportunity. If I can get speed and quality, speed is the love language of hiring managers. Everyone wants quality. If I feel like I can get speed and quality by doing what I've always done, and you come at me with some new adjacent skills, transferable skills, widen the aperture, what's my motivation? Why would I change anything I'm doing? I probably wouldn't, because what I've done has worked so well. And so a lot of our opportunity is really that of an influencer, more than just listing out what the adjacent skills are. What's the why? What's the reason a hiring manager should widen their aperture? And I need to find a way to create some pull around that. And some of that will come from the top-down directive that we are consciously going to change up our profiles and not just go to these same companies and same schools. Some of it might be because they're experiencing pain, because they're not able to find great talent. One of the things that frustrates me, Samantha, when diversity is talked about, a lot of people talk about it like there's this quality trade-off. You can't get quality if you hire someone from an underrepresented group. And a lot of people talk about it in the context of social good and all these things. And social good is great, and doing the right thing is great, and making sure we're fair and equitable, of course. But what doesn't get talked enough about is FOMO, is fear of missing out. When you are this narrow, you are missing out on amazing talent. And we talk about all these levers to try and get managers to change their profiles and whatever. And we try and use all these, it's the right thing socially. And we have this problem in the company we're trying to solve. Why are we not talking more about the amazing talent that comes out of these companies you haven't heard from, that comes out of schools you haven't heard from? And so part of the way I want us to create pull is to make sure we are also talking about, you're missing out. Think about the amazing talent you could be seeing. But bottom line, if they're not experiencing pain, it's really hard to convince people to change their behaviors, especially middle managers. It's going to be challenging.
Right. We have another question coming in. So she says she's worked in an outsourcing company in which they hire based on needs and expectation of clients, right? So we work focused on providing talent that they would hire. What is your advice to deal with our clients' biases and stereotypes so our D&I program can be applied to internal hiring along with the recruitment we do for our clients?
Yeah, it's even harder when you're with an outsourcing company, an RPO firm or something, because it's hard for you to do something that doesn't feel like it's going to please the customer. You get measured a lot on how happy the customer is with you. And if you push on them, it can be challenging. I think it's really important to start with those hiring managers where there's already pull. For any kind of change you're trying to make happen, find those managers inside this client company that are saying, I want to see more diversity. And focus as much of your energy as possible on the ones that are asking for it, where there's pull, where you're not having to push it on them, and get some wins. Find some success stories with that hiring manager that you can use, and then elevate that success story and shine the light on it. That's how you start to build more demand for this. This hiring manager was able to fill her 7 roles 20 days faster because she wasn't so hyper-focused on only getting people out of these companies and these schools. She widened the aperture. She actually got faster talent. Or this manager was able to get talent that could bring really different industry experience to our company because they were willing to try something new. Or this hiring manager that we worked with over here was able to raise the mix of talent from 70% men, 30% women to 50-50 because of these things we're doing. And we're going to talk about that. And what you want to do rather than pushing is you want to create demand. You want hiring leaders to see the success that this manager is getting, the accolades they're getting around diversity, the improvements to speed, the whatever it is. You want them to other managers to see that success, and then you want to talk about that success. I even took a hiring manager at a company I worked at on a road show. I took this hiring manager around to other business division department meetings, and I brought this person to talk about the success they were having, because that was part of my change management strategy. Is I wanted everyone to go, how is he doing that? I wanted to create demand for that. And me talking about it, great. But him talking about it as a VP, a well-respected VP, double great.
Awesome. Right. So we have the last question for today, John, and this basically piggybacks on, when you spoke about aligning hiring managers and interviewers to your, diversity strategy. So do you suggest that we have hiring managers go through guided role plays to sort of create a more diverse panel and have them ready to take on such interviews within the recruitment process?
Have them go through, sorry, you cut out, guided
role plays?
Oh, role plays.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you have to make sure people learn differently. So, I mean, I think there's a core amount of knowledge we need to be delivering to our hiring managers. There's training, there's interview guides, you need to provide people alternatives to what they've been doing. If what they've been doing is bad, you can't just say, stop doing that. You need to say, stop doing that and start doing this. And this thing needs to make sense, needs to have face validity. I need to understand how it's going to work. And then you need to give, not just skills and knowledge, you need to build confidence. And role playing can be really effective. We do role plays in our interview training where we pair people up. We do group discussions. We role model what it looks like to interview effectively, to be fair. And we teach people language that they can use to interrupt bias. Here's what you say. It doesn't have to be this big confrontational thing, but a lot of the work that we need to do in our profession to kind of improve diversity in the interviewing process is just focus people on objective hiring criteria. It's not about some advanced diversity interviewing question that it's some jujitsu move that you have that's going to make you the superior interviewer because you heard this one amazing question. It's really, am I making sure that I'm focused on objective hiring criteria tied to the work? Not what the person has in their background, not the companies and places, but what can they actually do? Is it skill-based? Is it performance-based? Am I actually evaluating their capability to do this job? And if it feels like there's a gap, am I giving the candidate an opportunity to close that gap for me? Can I pivot away from a tell me about a time question and maybe having them demonstrate a skill? Can I find an adjacent skill they have, a transferable skill, and kind of help make the connection for the other interviewers? Yeah, Samantha doesn't have X, but she has Y, and X and Y are so similar. I think she could learn it very quickly. I want people to role play, sure, as part of that to build confidence, but more importantly, I want them to feel safe and understand how to kind of show up in a meeting where you're making the case for someone that maybe otherwise would have been ignored. I think a biggest problem, most interview teams are focused on avoiding false positives, making bad hires. I think when you look at diversity, I'm more concerned about false negatives. Are we missing out on good hires? And are we missing out on good hires for stupid reasons? Stupid reasons tied to bias, pedigree, stereotypes, not giving someone a fair shot, affinity bias, all those things we talked about. So those are some of the things I would share.
Okay, thanks, John. I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A. We have a special note from Ellen for you, who says, "Hi, John. I just wanted to say I worked with you at Amazon years ago. I was on NAFC Ops team. I'm so inspired by this presentation. Thank you."
Excellent. Hello, Ellen. Yeah, thank you for this opportunity, Samantha. I am super passionate about this topic and feel like, obviously I still have a lot to learn, but I've gained such clarity on some of the root issues. And so I hope today was helpful in understanding some of the things we can do kind of pre-sourcing. So much of the focus is on the tactics of sourcing around this. And we have to be good at that for sure. But there's so much work we need to do as talent advisors before we even get into those sourcing conversations to really create the ROI opportunities around diversity. And I'm really inspired by the questions. So thank you everyone who asked questions. And Samantha, thank you for this opportunity to share.
Don, thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll send you a recording of this session along with a link to the resource that John was referring to earlier on in his discussion. With that, I'd like to wrap up on behalf of HackerEarth and Recruiting Toolbox. Thank you all for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.